Welcome to the Emotional Eating Unwrapped podcast. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, an emotional eating and weight loss coach for women looking to fall in love with eating, create healthy attachments with food, and lose weight sustainably. Hello, and welcome to another new episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, and you know those times when the world feels like it's collectively holding its breath, maybe for the last 5 years or so, or when every time you check the news or you scroll your phone and you feel your shoulders like creeping up towards your ears, and small talk even feels like it's not small, it's big talk, it's like heavy conversations, and underneath there's this subtle undertone that everyone is thinking about like big unsettled things. And somewhere in all of this, somewhere in kind of all of this swampy, heavier energy, you notice something about yourself. And what you might be noticing is that maybe you are eating differently, right? Maybe you are eating more often. Maybe there's more late night snacking. Maybe there's foods that you don't even think about or you haven't thought about are suddenly on your mind all the time, right? Like there's this urgent energy that's starting to become more prevalent in just in your inner world. And the truth is, you know that it's not just hunger. You can tell that it's not just hunger. You could tell that it's something deeper. And so if you've been there, and even if you're there right now, right, there's so much going on in the world right now. There's so much input that we're taking in every day. It's so unpredictable, yeah, that I just want you to listen to this episode and feel seen. I want you to listen and realize that you're not alone in this feeling of just instability. And more importantly, I want you to know that there's nothing wrong with you, right? There's nothing wrong with you, because in times of collective stress, whether it's political upheaval or economic instability, a health crisis, or even just the weight of the world's uncertainty, emotional eating, right? Emotional eating, or going through phases and seasons where food feels like it's being used as a coping mechanism, it's not a sign of weakness. But what it is it's a sign that your body is doing what it's unconsciously wired to do, which is survive and look for safety, stability, and relief. So today I want to walk you through exactly why this happens and how to work with your body instead of against it. So food doesn't have to be or feel like your only way to feel okay, right? So we're talking about why emotional overeating thrives in times of global stress and how we can manage it better, right? Or how we can manage it differently. So let's start with something some people never think about, right? Your nervous system. And I know that so many people have been talking about nervous system these days, which is actually a really good thing because it really is the control board for so much of your lived experience. That it's really important to understand that your nervous system doesn't just react to your individual life. It reacts to the emotional tone of the world around you. So even if your personal day-to-day life feels fine, you're still absorbing the collective tension and the collective energetic frequency through news, through conversation, through, of course, social media scrolling, these constant B-roll, the constant background signals. And when those signals are telling you either overtly or subtly that it's not safe, things are unstable, stay alert, your body shifts into a low grade fight or flight mode. And this is what's called hypervigilance. And here's the thing: hypervigilance, while you're in it, might feel like you're on top of everything. But really, what it's doing is it's slowly exhausting your your humanity. It's slowly exhausting your cells. It's slowly um, almost like hyper circuiting your nervous system. And your brain ends up searching for quick, reliable ways to feel grounded again. And food checks all of those boxes, right? Food is predictable, it's sensory, it's under your control. And it ends up leading us to something else that happens in times of global stress, which is think about what happens when your normal routines get disrupted. Okay? Because in calmer seasons, you might have these really regular, predictable routines, right? Predictable anchors, like your morning coffee before work, your commute, you have happy hour, dinner with friends, specific days of the week, workouts, meetup groups, whatever it is. But during global stress, for whatever reason, whether it's, you have to, right? Like in COVID, we had to lock down and stuff, but it's not always that aggressive. But oftentimes, just because of the nature of just the instability, those anchors often disappear because work schedules can shift, social plans get canceled. There's a lot of there's a lot of things changing, whether it's scheduling, right, or whether it's even just because people don't feel like they have as much energy as they had before, so they're staying more introverted. And what happens is the days start to blur together. And when the usual time markers that we're familiar with, that we used as almost like flag markers of our lives and of our days and of our feelings of connection to life and predictability, your brain also looks to kind of replicate that again. And food and eating often step into that role. Like meals can become the events of the day, right? Snacks become little breaks or transitions. And it's not just about eating for nourishment and eating for, the sake of being able to power us through our day as humans, or even just for enjoyment, because that's fine also. It actually is starting to serve a different purpose, which is creating pockets of predictability when everything else feels uncertain. And when food becomes your anchor, it's easy to slip into the I deserve this loop. Okay? And so what is the I deserve this loop? And the I deserve this loop is when days start to feel heavy or intense, there's a little voice that goes off in your head that can say, I'm going through so much. There's so much going on. Everything feels so like a lot. I deserve this. And normally what our bodies are really saying is, I deserve relaxation, I deserve relief, I deserve to feel anchored and grounded and calm. And that's the truth, right? You do deserve comfortability. The problem is when food is the only comfort that you go to, it's your only resource that you go to get comfort, whether it's because it's the quickest thing, or it's become something that feels a little bit more like a compulsive addictive thing. It becomes a problem because food doesn't give us any kind of long-term support, right? Food really ends up working like a short term loan, actually, where you feel better for a moment, but the underlying stress is still there, right? Truly. Because I know this too. It's like really only the first and second bite of food when you're trying to use it for relaxation or comfort is good, right? After that, it's kind of like diminishing returns. And whatever we felt before we turned to the food is still there. And now what's layered on top of that is guilt, perhaps, a feeling of judging ourselves or bullying ourselves, negative self talk. And, it ends up being kind of like an icky feeling. And sometimes the reason that the loop even happens to begin with, it's not even just about you, but it becomes it becomes kind of this communal thing with the people around you, because we don't, like, during times of global stress, we don't just cope in isolation, right? So the loop isn't even something that, it's just like we said earlier, it's not just about you, it's about the environment around you. And it might not even be just your immediate environment. Because think about it. During the pandemic, for example, you couldn't open up social media app without seeing banana bread, sourdough, quarantine snacks, right? So it's like we are wired to mirror what we see. And so when the whole world is collectively leaning on food for comfort, it stops feeling like an individual thing and it starts feeling like a shared ritual. So it stops, it really does. It stops it, and that kind of makes it easier to have it go on for as long as it does and not realize that it's a problem. Because a shared ritual makes it harder to notice when something shifts from occasional comfort to constant reliance, right? And that's something really, really, really important. I remember what it felt like to be stuck in the cycle of emotional eating. I tried every diet out there, counting, tracking, restricting, but nothing ever worked. Food controlled my life, my thoughts, and I constantly felt guilty after eating. But once I learned how to heal the emotional triggers behind my eating and trust my body, everything changed. I stopped obsessing over food, the weight started coming off naturally, and I found real freedom in how I ate and lived. So, I created the Sober Eating year-long mentorship to help other women experience the same transformation. So you can stop battling with food, you can lose weight without deprivation, and you can feel confident in your body again. In this mentorship, you'll have access to my proven nervous system rewiring method. You'll have access to live coaching with me, weekly accountability, and a community of women who truly understand your journey. You'll also have free access to my signature programs, the Emotional Eating Solution and Decoding Permanent Weight Loss, valued at $2,000. Click the link in the show notes to explore the mentorship today. You don't have to do this alone. I'll be right there with you every step of the way. And it brings me to something that I see all the time in the mentorship with the women I work with, because when the big picture feels out of your hands, and the big picture can be, there's some universal big picture things, but there are some, big picture things that are more, that feel more pertinent to you as an individual, right? So whether it's politics or the economy, the state of the planet, your brain searches for smaller areas where you can feel in charge. And because, like, the brain hates nothing more than feeling out of control, right? Until we train it and rewire it to allow allow a feeling of discomfort, to train it where and our nerve to train our brains and our nervous system to where actually letting go is a default mechanism that feels self-serving and supportive. That rewiring is a training that takes time. But when we are in that search for control, food is one of the arenas, right? Where we kind of go to execute control, right? For some people, that looks like tightening the reins with rigid rules, right? That's control. But for others, it's quite the opposite, right? It's intentionally breaking all the rules as a way to push back. And for some, it's both, right? And from a lot of the women I work with, it's both, right? It's a consistent cycle of, emotional overeating, then getting tired of our own bullshit. So we just kind of like go with the rigid rules, and that's good for a couple of weeks or months or something. And then, you know, like we said, the global crisis or something triggers us and we're back. We can't deal with the rigidity. So we kind of break our rigidity and then feel like a failure and hit the rock bottom and the rock bottom launch pad that I've spoken about in some of my other episodes. But at the end of the day, both of these sides of the coin, both responses are actually doing the same thing. They're trying to reclaim agency in a world that feels unpredictable and unsafe, right? And unreliable. And the unpredictability has another effect that actually goes even deeper. Because global stress doesn't just create new anxiety, it can reopen old and generationally inherited anxiety. Okay, so we know from research that our cells can carry the generational trauma of generations before us. Right? This is what we're learning now in epigenetics, and we're seeing it in diseases, and we're seeing it with mental health and addiction and all these different things. So when we are living in this kind of global stress zeitgeist times, or when there is global stress, it's not just the stress of now, it's the stress of old, right? Because a recession or an unstable financial time in the world or an unstable economy might remind you of the financial instability that you maybe grew up with, right? Or you might even be feeling anxiety. You're not even sure where it's coming from, but it was your ancestors' anxiety that's now being awakened in your cells because of the connectivity and, the epigenetics of, what we're now understanding, that there are brains in our cells that carry old wounds, right? A public health crisis might bring back memories of a time, where you felt isolated or powerless. I know so many people that, public health crisis where we're forced to, isolate ourselves or are have really just, have very different reactions from different people, and people had a lot of reactions to that surprised them because they didn't know that they'd feel that way until it happened. They didn't know they'd react a certain way to isolation or powerlessness because it just was so not a way that their personality had ever reacted before. But, the public health crisis kind of triggered something within them that maybe they were just discovering about themselves, right? So when old experiences get stirred up, the urge to self-soothe can feel massive. And not, like I said, not just because of today's uncertainty, but because it's echoing everything your body remembers from before. And the generations before you too. And so what happens when this kind of behavior becomes part of your daily life for months, for years, for decades? The part that I think is one of the hardest things to communicate and talk about is if emotional overeating and using food as your pacifier for uncertainty and using eating and food as your ritual for predictability, right? If it becomes the only way that gets you through every hard season, it can start to feel like just who you are, right? You can start to meld this behavior with your identity. And that makes changing or healing or, believing that you can rewire some of these patterns, it makes that feel like it's even harder because it's no longer just about changing a habit or a behavior. It's about changing a piece of you. It's changing a piece of the identity you've built around survival. But here's the truth. Survival patterns, they can be honored for the role they played, right? So it's not about, you're never going to be, you're never going to be not you, right? But you can let go of the survival patterns and you can honor these behaviors for what they served you when they served you and the awareness wasn't awakened within you yet. But they can be gently replaced with new patterns that serve you better, that are more aligned with your self-value, with your self-worth, with your goals. And so let's talk about what that looks like in practice. Okay, so what does it look like in practice? So I always say when I work with women in the mentorship or, in any of my programs, you need to first have a self-awareness. So you need to name what's happening, right? And you need to notice and you need to be willing to be a witness to your behaviors. And ask yourself, as you're doing a behavior, am I actually hungry or am I searching for something else? Right? Am I trying to meet a need? Right? Am I trying to feel grounded, anchored? Am I trying to distract? Right? And then you can experiment with other ways to meet the need, because once you name what's really happening, there's a certain feeling of like empowerment and belief that you could find a solution for yourself once you actually know what you're trying to solve for. So when you name what's happening, right, you now know what you need to solve for and you can experiment with other ways. Right. So examples, and my recommendation is always to find your own things, because I'm going to give examples here. But everybody has their own, really has their own unique thing. So I always say experiment with that. But you can, you could do breath work or, some nervous system regulation, some tapping, right? You could do movement that feels supported. Um, non-food rituals that give you the same type of predictability. I just came off of a call today with the women in the mentorship. We actually had our bi-monthly coaching call today. And one of the women in the mentorship actually drinks a lot of tea. And she was feeling like that was a problem. And, it was interesting because we had a whole conversation and I said, well, why do you think that that's a problem to be drinking a lot of tea? I think she felt like because she's healing her compulsive relationship with eating, using eating as a coping mechanism, or using eating and compulsive eating, um, in this non self-serving way. Now that she's not doing that anymore, but she's drinking a lot of tea, which she feels like she's doing instead of that was a problem. And I was saying to her, like, that's not such a problem. It's not a problem to want to soothe yourself with something, right? But what you don't want is for it to be self-harming or out of alignment with your self-worth and self-value and make you feel bad about yourself. So non-food rituals, right? That includes a cup of tea. That includes maybe, drink, water or sparkling water or something, or a mid-morning walk. Um, you know, who knows, right? You want to think of something that is your own. And third, you want to treat yourself with compassion in the process. Because if food has been your pacifier, your source of grounding, your anchor through global stress, right? Like through these big, huge shifts while you are getting inputs from places that you might not even be opening up your antenna for, right? On purpose, potentially. That means that you've been trying to be resourceful, right? You had turned the light on for the survival mode to go on, and your body was just doing what it could to keep you afloat. It wanted you to feel better. And all you're doing now is you're not necessarily, you're not necessarily like disconnecting yourself from that, but you're just bringing awareness to it, recognizing the motivations around it, and you're adding more anchors to the boat. And something I always say is healing from emotional overeating is never not emotional eating, right? It's okay if like occasionally you're not hungry and you find yourself like, going and having something to soothe yourself. You just want to be able to have awareness around it and be conscious and intentional and in your power when you do it, so that you don't, you're not coming from a place of numbing out or compulsiveness where there's no pause, it feels really out of, completely unintentional and out of control, right? And you find yourself a victim of your behavior. You never want to feel that way. So really the tool is awareness and discernment, and having being able to say to yourself, like, yep, I did this, it's fine, but it's enough, right? And so occasionally, if food is something that you turn to, make sure you do it responsibly, and you have your ways of doing it where you can leave the situation of turning to food as more of a, as more of an anchor, and you don't walk away feeling bad about yourself. That's the goal. But you also want to have more anchors, like I said, in the boat with you, so that it's not always food. Right? That shouldn't be it, because if it's always food, you're putting yourself in a position to to set yourself up. And like I said before, create an identity around around this, which isn't what we want to do. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, yes, this is me, this is what I do, and the world has, created my nervous system dysregulation, I've been turning to food in a compulsive or numbing out way more than I've ever had before, or this has been going on for a while, I want you to remember that you're not weak, right? You're not broken, right? You're just living in a crazy time. Like, this is the truth. And while food may have been a refuge, It doesn't have to be your only refuge. It doesn't have to be your only refuge. Right? You can build other wells, other resources that you can go to, that you can plug into, other outlets that you can plug into and get energy and get groundedness and get soothing and get comfort. Okay? So that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. Just a reminder, we are doing our giveaway. So the giveaway is a one-on-one call with me. If you leave us a nice review and you rate us nicely on our podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, and you take a screenshot of that and you send it over to at Be Well by AK on Instagram, or you send it to podcast at Be Well by AK. You can be entered into our giveaway and win a free one-on-one session with me, which would be lovely. I would love to meet you. So please do that if you feel so inclined. And if you are watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And I will see you next time. I'm Alana. Thank you so much for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped.